Hello and welcome to Cherry Red TV. I'm Iain McNay and my guest today is Niall Couper. Hi Niall.
Hello.
And Niall has written, many of you will know that Niall wrote this great book, or compiled this great book, Spirit of Wimbledon, a few years ago, which was very much about the old Wimbledon FC and included the first year of AFC Wimbledon. And he now has out a new book, This Is Our Time, the AFC Wimbledon Story. And it's a real chunky book, 550 pages, some great pictures, and it is the story of the 10 years of AFC Wimbledon. And of course, AFC Wimbledon was formed when we lost Wimbledon FC, because it was moved to that place near Northampton up the M1, wasn't it?
That I can barely even talk about, Iain.
Yes. We don't have to mention the name of where it went.
No, totally not.
But we lost our club, and the great thing about it was, there's something about, you called this book The Spirit of Wimbledon, there was such a spirit amongst the supporters. After all our campaign against the move, once we've lost, there was this famous meeting at the Wimbledon Community Centre, must have been 1,000 people in there, a member of WISA, which was the Wimbledon Independent Supporters Association, where Chris Stewart, our then chairman, suggested we start a new club.
One of the most famous things of that quote is that he just said, all I want to do is watch football.
That's right.
Which is, for Wimbledon fans, probably the most iconic phrase that people know. And, you know, that meeting, the passion that was there was the coming together of what had been a horrible year of protest, but it brought together some of the great thinkers and great movers and great campaigners who among the Wimbledon fan base. And those people really brought together the spirit of Wimbledon that had been existing for generations and basically crystallised that into one club, AFC Wimbledon. And I totally believe from all my research that those individuals really took on what was happening in football in the wider circumstances, in the wider world. And they made AFC Wimbledon become a flag bearer of the fan movement. And, you know, people like Sports Direct have been going, and there was examples of Enfield Town, but I think that all of that came together at that one perfect moment, and Chris Stewart, Mark Jones and Ivor Heller, and there are other names that are now well known among Wimbledon fans. Those people picked up that flag and really took it and moved it on and created what I think for the wider football movement. And you speak to people like David Conn and kind of some of the really big names in the media, and Martin Samuels and you know, Glenn Moores and the people that are big names in the newspaper industry, and they will say, you know, Wimbledon is this club that everybody can aspire to. We are the new fairy tale. You know, we've kind of done it and we've created ourselves, and it's such an iconic vehicle that every football fan, they look at it and realise that there is an opportunity to own your own club. There is an opportunity to really make a big difference and inspire so many other people, because that's what Wimbledon fans maybe are beginning to forget, because we're starting to think about results again, which is a lovely situation to be in, but we've achieved so much. And I think hopefully my book really puts that forward and makes people realise that this is a great way for people to follow. It's a template for so many other clubs to take on.
Of course, the book starts with the protest, doesn't it? The story of the protest at Selhurst Park about the proposed move to this place.
Exactly. I mean, totally. I mean, that's where you look at the strength of so many characters that came together and so much organisation that went through. I mean, at the time, I was the editor of a fanzine called Yellow and Blue, and we ended up outselling the official programme 3-1, which is just absolutely unheard of. And we had some great writers in there. We got some great columnists that were there. Chris Phillips, obviously, who's now does the DJing at the ground and stuff like that. You know, they were great individuals, and it just brought everybody together. I honestly can remember sitting down on my seat at Selhurst Park and knowing 3 or 4 people when I started going. And, you know, football had become a habit. It hadn't become a passion. It hadn't really, you know, it lost its soul a bit. And that was not just me as a Wimbledon fan, because I still loved the club, but you could see it throughout the whole football, throughout the wider world. Sky Sports had taken, removed that gap between the club and the fans, would become so wide. And that's what really, I think, engaged Wimbledon fans during that protest season. We suddenly had a connection between far more. It's far more than just the three people around me. It was the 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, 300, 1,000 people.
It united us, didn't it?
It united us all.
Yeah.
And without that first season, AFC Wimbledon would not be, that first season of protest,
yes.
AFC Wimbledon would not be as strong as we were now. And it made us realise that there is such an important connection between the people who run the club, the people that play on that pitch, and the fans. And that was something that had been lost, had lost its way throughout the wider football community. And I think there are a number of football fans that will probably look on us probably a little bit enviously and say, right, actually, we have that connection. I think it is one of the most wonderful things that throughout the book, there are a number of players that will cite back going, one of the most important things that they've had is the meetings where they go through and they're told the history of AFC Wimbledon. They're told about the battles and the fights and the meetings we had with Couper and all that kind of protest that was going on. And that passion, I think, is so important. And you see so many of the players, even now, that have taken that forward. It's a great thing that somebody like Seb Brown, was at the meeting.
He's our goalkeeper. That's right. He was a kid then, wasn't he?
He was a kid, and he was at the meeting where we voted for a season ticket boycott. And he recalls that. Yeah. And you think, this is Seb Brown, and now he's like a goalkeeper at AFC Wimbledon. And it's just that history, that connection towards the fans, the players, and the manager, and it's so important. And it just, I think it's such a passion, it's such a template to say, right, this is what football clubs should be.
Yeah, and of course the thing that we should say at this early stage is that you compiled the book really because it's nearly all quotes from people that have been involved, whether they're supporters, players, managers, people that have helped us. It's everybody is there with their contribution at the relevant time.
I've tried as much as possible to keep my opinion out of it. It is, I mean, there are bits in it where I've talked, because I've been there and I've been on the inside, I was on the board, I did the programme, I was around the players in the early stages, so I kind of know a lot of that. But most of it was about giving the key figures the opportunity to recount the stories that are really key to AFC Wimbledon through their own eyes. And that for me was really important to document that, because it's not, I don't really want it to be me to pass judgment. I want Wimbledon fans to look at it and go, well, this is the reality. This is really what people had. This is the insight to, there are the football moments. There's the Woking Cup finals that people recall. There's the Matt Everard header at Herne Bay that I absolutely love. It means the world to me. But the word, having that through Matt Everard's words, makes so much difference.
Yes.
I think that's the real key. And then of course there's the playoff final at Manchester. And what I've done there is quite a unique chapter. Is looked at interviewing as many of the players that were involved on the pitch and getting them to recall what it meant to them, what that header that hit the post in the very final minute, how we were that close. We were millimetres away from not being in the Football League and not achieving our goal.
That's right.
And that was amazing. And then, of course, there's Danny Kedwell. And I think Danny Kedwell got a bit of bad press because people, when he left to go to Gillingham. But Danny Kedwell, and for me, I mean, this is the whole title of the book. He's like an absolutely 110% passionate football person, passionately got the AFC Wimbledon story. He was only ever going to leave the club to go to the club that he supported as a boy, that he stood in a terrace, and he'd always wanted to play for. So, people should leave Danny Kedwell alone. I think he really got AFC Wimbledon. He understood the whole thing.
It was his quote, actually.
Totally.
Just explain how you got that quote. This is the title, This Is Our Time.
It's his quote. He basically, it's 3-3 on penalties. It's Luton Town have missed one extra one. Danny Kedwell is on the halfway line. All the players are lined up, arm in arm. Danny Kedwell.
Picture here, the players lined up.
Yeah, exactly.
Kedwell looking at the ball.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Danny Kedwell says, "Is this the one to win it?" He asks, and it comes up, yes. And he just turns to the players and says, "This is our time." He walks down and takes that penalty. And obviously the rest is history. Yeah. Danny Kedwell's views on all that happened before and all that happened afterwards are all there. And it was, for me, that was, I spoke to so many other players, but that was the one quote that really epitomised the AFC Wimbledon story, because it is. I mean, we're at, I I think a lot of Wimbledon fans forget that we are at kind of a tipping point almost in football. It's getting that way. You look at the examples of Rangers and Swansea City and loads of other clubs that are all becoming more and more linked towards the fans' ownership.
Portsmouth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, that element, finances aren't there as much as they can be, and fans really need to take the responsibility if they want to have that, if they want to have ownership and community element into their club, if they really want to feel involved and not have that disconnect that exists at so many other clubs. And, it's no surprise that somebody like Roy Keane used to call the Manchester United the prawn eating sandwich brigade, because there was no link between the supporters and the players.
Well, one of the things I like about the book, Niall, is that it is a little bit of a warts and all. It's not saying it was all a wonderful story, although
totally not.
Overall the story is fantastic. But there was testing moments, wasn't there? And there was the time where, in effect, the first manager, Terry Iain, got sacked. And
so
you cover that in here.
I do cover that in there, and it was, I think we lived the first year as AFC Wimbledon was just a complete honeymoon, and then the Terry Eames example and the sacking of Terry Eames really exposed people going, well, this is not going to be a bed of roses. There are going to be really serious issues. And also, that was one of the first times where fractions on the board were surfaced, and that again is aired in the book. There were disagreements. I was on the board myself, and I had disagreements with people on the board, and there was certain directions people who wanted to go to really community level, spirited club, and there are other people.
Just explain briefly that the board, the Don Struss board, which is the top board, is elected board. So it's a democracy, and of course you get people with different opinions, and it's a great challenge to find a consensus in that situation. We're all fans, but we've got different opinions.
And the other thing on that, we all have different skill sets, and we're all used to doing things in different ways. Certainly when I was on the board, I'd look at it and you probably had 12 quite relatively successful people on there, but all in totally different businesses. I was in a newspaper industry, so I was working on the sports desk of The Independent. So I was used to deadlines, I was used to decisions being made yesterday. Everything needs to be instant. We had to really try and get the best products and make things look really, really good as quickly as possible. There were other people on the board that were, excellent in council meetings and used to running things by committee. Those two ethoses are obviously going to clash.
Yeah.
And it takes an awful lot of learning for people to realise how all these personalities are going to work. These are people that are not natural bedfellows. That's the board. It's not natural bedfellows. You have 12 people elected, but you wouldn't have those 12 people if you were running a company.
They're the ones ultimately trying to make a decision together.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that comes out, which I found a fascinating read, was when Daryl McAntony, I think in our third year it might have been the second or third year, very rich businessmen wanted to buy a football club. And of course, here again, we're faced with a situation where a rich owner wants to come in, give us lots of money, but he wants to own the club, which was complete antithesis of what we were. So that was must have been a fascinating thing to research that for you.
Yeah, totally. One of the big things on that was that actually split the board. Not completely. It was 2 or 3 that were wanting to take it further, and the other 9 that really wanted to dismiss it. But then even the 9 that wanted to dismiss it were saying, how far do we dismiss it? Should it go to the members, or should we take the fact that we're elected people and we just, make that decision for them? And it sounds small, but those are hugely fundamental things, because is the club's goal to just go back to Wimbledon and say to Coppell, effectively 2 fingers up at you, we've gone and found our ground in Wimbledon, we're owned by Wimbledon, and that's it. It doesn't matter about the ownership because that's our goal. Or is the goal to be this beacon to the wider football world to say not only are we going to try and get ourselves back to Wimbledon, but we're going to say the fans did this and the fans are running this, and this is a new model of how football should be run. Because one of them is quite short term. It's natural to feel, I've shown you up. 2 fingers to you. You said we couldn't have a ground in Wimbledon. We've got a ground in Wimbledon, which is what McAntony offered as the short-term goal, which is very, very attractive to a lot of old Wimbledon fans. But you had a whole load of, not new Wimbledon fans, but other Wimbledon fans who have been woken up to the whole idea, the fact that we can make a difference to the wider football world, not just AFC Wimbledon. While taking AFC Wimbledon to this great achievement, I mean, you know, you have to think, we were effectively playing on a park pitch. And we did play on park pitches.
First 2 years in the combined counties league.
Effectively playing on park pitches, you know, that were being fenced off with ridiculously high crowds, to then go to the Football League, and it is an amazing journey. And I remember, I'm trying to think, Dave Anderson, speaking to Dave Anderson about this.
Who's our manager, who's our, in effect, our third manager.
Yep.
Yeah.
Dave Anderson, when he came, and he said, right, if I took this story, because we speak to him at the end of the book, if I took this story and gave it to an American film director, they would just laugh. So, right, you just started with a bunch of people having a kick about on a common, and you've got promoted, 6, 7 times. You've regained your place in the Football League. You're now thinking about owning your own ground back in Wimbledon, which nobody had ever even considered would be possible. To dismiss, you know, how ridiculous. It would just be a ridiculous Hollywood fairy tale. People would go, you can't do that. You know, it's not possible. And, you know, Dave Anderson's credit, he was then going, right, who should play whoever, what characters, and yeah, poor Ivor's got labelled the Danny DeVito role model, but, you know, I'm sure he can take that. And there are other, I think he goes on about how he would describe Eric Samuelson and other people behind the scenes that have done fantastic jobs for AFC Wimbledon. You know, I can't remember, I think he might give himself Tom Cruise, but I can't remember exactly what he said, but, you know, it is a fairy tale.
So who were the people that you were most kind of impressed with what they said, in terms of maybe it was quite hard to track them down and you were surprised with what they come in with in the end in the book?
I mean, I was really astonished by Danny Kedwell's brilliant. You know, he was brilliant. People like I think the early heroes, the early kind of people, the Matt Everards, you know, really got it. Frankie Howard really got it. You know, there are a couple of the players that now live in the States, and they're on the guest books in the background. They don't necessarily go on by themselves, but they're on the guest books looking at it. Or the fact that Kevin Cooper was basically stopped on the side of the motorway and was just basically listening to the commentary of the playoff final for ages. And these people continually go back to wanting to be connected with the club. The Gareth Grahams of this world, you know, some of the kind of crazy characters that were early on. And I think the other character that I think people really underestimate is Simon Bassey. Simon Bassey is an absolutely key link throughout the whole of Wimbledon story. He's now the first team coach, but also played in something like the second or third game of AFC Wimbledon's history in one of the pre-season games. And he was like, what the hell am I getting myself into? He looked at the team, and there was this guy, Keith Ward, up front, and he talks about Keith Ward. Keith Ward, he knew as a left back, could not comprehend what he was doing up front. Just was seeing the most strangest thing in this world. And he thought, this club really do not know what they're doing, but stuck with it. And if you talk to Luke Garrard's brilliant, absolutely lovely bloke, fantastic to speak to. Played in almost every position for AFC Wimbledon. But he will talk of Simon Bassey being the person that will still speak to. He still speaks to all these ex-players. Yes. He still keeps that tie and those links in, and still keeps that passion driving. He understands why AFC Wimbledon were formed. He understands the battle and the fight and the struggles that we as fans went through. And he makes sure that that lives on, not just in the new players, but in the old players. You know, when Luke Garrard says to me, if I'm not managing or playing when I'm 35, I will be a season ticket holder at AFC Wimbledon. You know that's true, and you also know that that's the likes of Simon Bassey that have put that into Luke's head. Yes. And that, for me, is one of the most astounding stories. But it's not just Luke, there's so many other people like that.
Yeah, and I think also what I liked about the book, there was ex-Wimbledon FC managers like Dave Bassett and Terry Burton that also contributed and were very positive in their own way, but also they would see the bigger picture, and they see that our future is not necessarily going to be easy. Well, we have to keep our ethos. We're going to be a fan-owned club. We want to move back to Wimbledon. There's a process there that's starting, and we hope we'll end up with the dream come true. But there's so much for us to learn along the way, and I think one of the things this book does for me, it not only inspires me, because I'm obviously been there, as, like you have, right from the beginning, supporting the club and being in their own way, part of the story. But what this book does is it gives an example, as you said at the beginning, to other football fans that if things are not going your way, there's actually something you can do about it. You know, we did our protesting and our moaning, and then when we decided to form the club, all that energy went focused, forming the club, getting it going, and certain people you mentioned, I'd like to add Trevor Williams to that list you mentioned. Yes. There was really key people to start with that did so much to help the club. And as it grew, the great thing is that you've got the volunteers selling the programmes, working the turnstiles, doing all kinds of things, helping out with the entertaining, etc. in the boardroom. There's all kinds of volunteers there that get involved. Some are seen as some are behind the scenes, and they all contribute in their own way. And that's what makes us so different from virtually every other football club.
It's that passion. And I think what is the hardest challenge for the Don's Trust Board, who obviously run AFC Wimbledon, is to ensure that that passion never dies, because that means that in a way that we need to keep on offering a new challenge for that passionate fan base, and it's a very passionate fan base that have worked so hard to make sure that there's always something else they can achieve, something else they can aspire to take the club to that next level and help as much as possible. It's that inclusion and that belief and that thank you to the fans, because without the fans, there'd be nothing. And that's the story of how AFC Wimbledon started in the first place, you know. With the fans, there would be nothing, and that's what football really needs to remember again. And that's why we are, in my view, that flag bearer to everyone else. You know, without the fans, you really are nothing.
You've also got some great images in here, because Lee Martin at Getty Images, who's a season ticket holder, opened up the Getty, which is a huge archive, opened up the archive to us. Do you want to just talk through some of the great pictures that are in here?
The cover picture is a great one. I mean, admittedly, that's not a Getty one, but there are plenty of others. There's some of the really old history ones as well.
Yeah.
There's some pictures I've never seen from, you know, at the start we go for the summarising that first 100 years of Wimbledon FC. There's some pictures I'd never seen in there that I think are absolutely iconic. And then there are the pictures from, you know, there's that Hermbe header, there's the goals from Woking, there's loads from the playoff final, and you know trying to make sure that I'm getting that image that goes with that story, that iconic image. So it's not just the memories of, you know, even Jermaine Darlington's affair and you know, and all the other kind of key football games that we've had throughout the years, but to make sure that we have that image that epitomises that moment. And I think that's it, because it's 550 pages, but you've got hundreds and hundreds of pictures in there. And as you say, if each picture's worth 1,000 words, then I'm sure, Ian, if it was no pictures and just words, then God knows how big the book would be.
Yeah.
Certainly wouldn't have published it. But, you know, that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to try and get it so that it was the definitive AFC Wimbledon story, really.
Yeah. So this book covers the first 10 years, and we've got where we've got, and we're now, as we're finding out, we talk here as we're near the bottom of League Two and facing having to deal with that challenge. We are a fan-owned club. We only have the money put in by supporters. We haven't got a big guy at the top there who's running the club and putting in millions and millions to keep us going. So the challenge, really, in a way, we've got so far, which is brilliant. But the next few years, even more of a challenge, aren't they?
Completely. I mean, for me, what we have to do is take the passion of the fans and look. And at the end, there's a chapter where we have Terry Burton, Bobby Gould, Dave Bassett, Dario Gradi, all the ex-Wimbledon managers from the last 30 years, with one or two exceptions, are in there, and they're offering their opinion about what the club needs to do to move forward. And in general, kind of ruining the end of it almost, is look at youth and look at that stadium and getting that bigger stadium in Wimbledon, in our own heartland. And that's where the passion and the hard work of our fans could take us to that next level, making sure that that happens, because there is the will now for the first time on the council. And the likes of Wissa and the Don's Trust have worked so hard behind the scenes to make sure that, and it's all in there, that the council were listening and that they did the right processes and they did all those battles. People won't realise all of that. There were so many political battles behind the scenes to make sure that that route is open to us, and it is, and we need to, as fans, as a whole group of fans, bash on that door in a very collective and organised way, coordinated way, and we've been brilliant at doing that campaigning throughout our history to make sure that happens, because that is, in the words of Dave Bassett and in the words of Bobby Gould and the words of Terry Burton, the way that we can make that next step and secure our future and make sure that we are a club that can, you know, go even further than we already have. I mean, the next 10 years, it's going to be some hell of a battle, but it's going to be a really interesting one.
And the thing about Wimbledon fans is they love a challenge.
We will have a challenge.
Yeah. OK, we need to finish now. Thanks very much. Again, this is the book. This is our time. Thank you for watching Cherry Red TV. And I hope we see you again soon with Niall coming back again to talk about the next stage of the Wimbledon story. Goodbye.